Hey guys, tonight we begin with something gritty, grand, and absolutely unforgiving. Life in the Roman Empire. Not as a senator, not as an emperor, no golden laurel crown, no marble baths. Tonight, you're not Julius Caesar. You're just you dropped unprepared into a world of sandals, sewage, and state-sponsored crucifixion. The enduring legacy of the blacksmith, a tale of fire, steel, and alchemy. In the heart of the medieval world, far away from the grand halls of kings and the elegance of noble courts, there was a life that few ever saw but which the entire world depended on. It was the life of a blacksmith, a figure often hidden in the soot and smoke of their forge, shaping the very metal that held the world together. This story begins not with a hero, not with a knight or an emperor, but with a simple, humble apprentice, born into a world of fire, heat, and the endless rhythm of hammer-striking metal. Imagine, if you will, being born into this world. The air is always thick with smoke, the sound of the forge constant in the background. Your first memories are not of running through green fields or playing with toys, but of the harsh heat of the furnace, the hiss of metal and water, and the deep clang of hammer on anvil. From the moment you could walk, you were part of the forge. There was no choice, no escaping it. Your family had been blacksmiths for generations, and the trade was passed down as naturally as breathing. Your father, a towering figure of muscle and hard work, had been a blacksmith since his youth, just as his father had been before him. There were no titles, no riches, just the constant fire and the smoke that clung to your skin, your hair, your clothes, your very soul. By the time you were 6, you were already an apprentice, though the word apprentice hardly seemed to apply. You weren't learning a craft, you were a tiny, unpaid assistant. Your job was to help stoke the fires, pump the bellows, clean the tools, and learn, mostly by observation, the art of transforming raw iron into something useful, something that would serve the kingdom. You had no childhood. Your toys were tongs and hammers, and your playground was a dirt floor next to a furnace hot enough to burn your eyebrows off. While other children were playing outside, chasing chickens, and laughing, you were learning how not to burn yourself on the molten metal or how to swing a hammer until your arms felt like they might fall off. Your father, the blacksmith, was not a kind, gentle figure. He was a hard man, tempered by decades of exposure to the heat of the forge and the endless demands of the village. His hands were like tree bark, scarred and calloused from years of working with fire and steel. His voice was gruff, and his patience was short. He had no time for questions, only commands. "Hit it harder," he would say, his scowl deepening as you fumbled with your tools. "You're not here to mess around. You're here to work." His words were like the ringing sound of the hammer on the anvil, harsh but essential, shaping you into something strong, something that could endure the brutal world of the forge. Holidays? A myth. There were no breaks in the forge. The fire never stopped burning, and neither did you. You were always working, always laboring, always striving to perfect your craft, or at least make it good enough to survive. You learned how to live in pain, how to breathe through the discomfort, how to push through exhaustion. By the time you were 10, you could already smell like iron and swear like a sailor, and your arms were strong enough to carry water buckets heavier than your dog, if it hadn't run away from the constant clanging of the forge. The blacksmith's world was no place for childhood, it was a place for survival, for enduring, for creating. As you grew older, your body transformed. The muscles in your arms and legs thickened, not from the joy of play or exercise but from hours of repetitive motion, hammering, shaping, bending, and heating. Your joints began to creak, your back began to bend, and your skin, once soft, became rough and stained with soot. The forge had become part of you. You no longer just worked in it, you lived in it. Your body had been molded by the heat, the weight, and the repetition. Every swing of the hammer, every turn of the bellows, every task, no matter how small, became part of you. But despite the exhaustion, despite the pain, there was pride in your work. You were not just a servant of the forge, you were a creator, a shaper of civilization. Without blacksmiths, the world would fall apart. Swords wouldn't be sharp enough for battle, plows wouldn't break the earth, doors wouldn't open. You were the one who made all of it possible. Your hands crafted the weapons that knights would wield, the tools that farmers used, the nails that held together the very buildings in which people lived. And yet, in the eyes of most, you were invisible. No one thanked you for your work. When a knight wielded his sword, no one remembered the blacksmith who had forged it. When a farmer harvested his crops, no one thought about the blacksmith who had made the plow. You were the silent, unseen force that held the world together. War was the only time you truly saw recognition. When the drums of war beat, the demand for weapons and armor skyrocketed, and the forge was flooded with work. The world needed you. But peace? Peace was a different story. When the swords were sheathed and the battle cries faded, the orders stopped. No one cared about nails or household tools. You were left to survive on the meager income from repairs, from mending broken equipment, from fixing the unimportant things. The forge burned less brightly, the coins grew fewer, and the world seemed to forget how essential you were. Still, the work never ended. There was always something to fix, something to create, something to improve. No task was ever truly finished. Even when you completed one job, another would take its place. This relentless cycle of work, create, repair, and repeat left little room for rest. Sleep was a luxury that you rarely had, and when you did sleep, it was a fitful, restless sleep, filled with the echoing clang of hammers in your mind, the smell of iron in your nostrils, and the never-ending ache in your bones. Your body, once strong and capable, began to deteriorate. Your hands, once nimble and full of dexterity, became stiff and swollen from years of blistering heat, sharp metal, and constant use. Your back, hunched from bending over the anvil for hours, ached with every movement. Your knees creaked when you crouched, and your shoulders popped when you lifted the hammer. But you kept working. The forge demanded it, and so did your family. You couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. You were a blacksmith, and the forge owned you. In time, your child took up the hammer, just as you had. They were too young to understand the weight of it, the toll it would take on their body, the unrelenting cycle of work that would dominate their life. But they would learn. Just as you had. You would teach them how to shape metal, how to swing a hammer, how to keep going even when your body screamed for rest. The cycle would continue, from father to son, from one generation to the next. But as you aged, something else began to stir within you. It wasn't just the pride in your work that kept you going. It was something deeper, something more spiritual. You began to think of the work of the blacksmith as not just a craft, but a form of transformation. You had seen the raw iron, unshaped and wild, transformed into something useful, something essential. You saw the fire change the metal, shaping it, purifying it, molding it into something strong. And you began to realize that the work you were doing in the forge was not unlike the work of the alchemists. You were not just forging metal, you were forging the very world itself. Alchemy, like blacksmithing, was about transformation. The alchemists sought to change lead into gold, to find the philosopher's stone that could grant immortality. But in their search for physical transformation, they had discovered something deeper. Alchemy was about spiritual transformation. Just as the blacksmith shaped metal, the alchemist sought to shape the soul, to purify it, to make it stronger and more perfect. The work of the forge was not just the work of the hands, but of the heart and soul. You, too, were an alchemist in your own right. You were transforming raw material into something greater, something that could survive, something that could endure. The life of a blacksmith was hard, unrelenting, and unforgiving, but it was also a life of purpose. It was a life of creation, of transformation, and of legacy. You were not just forging tools and weapons. You were forging the very foundation of civilization, one hammer strike at a time. And even though you might not have received the praise or recognition you deserved, you knew that without you, the world would crumble. The forge would always burn, the hammer would always swing, and the legacy of the blacksmith would continue, passed down through the generations. And as the fire of the forge slowly began to burn lower in your own life, you could rest easy knowing that the cycle would continue, that your son would one day take up the hammer, and that the world would continue to turn, shaped by the fire and the steel you had crafted. For in the end, you were more than a blacksmith. You were a creator, a transformer, an alchemist of fire and steel. And though the world might never truly see the depths of your work, it would always feel its effects. Because the blacksmith, like the alchemist, shapes the world, not just with metal, but with spirit, with endurance, and with the unyielding fire that burns within them.